Hey everybody, how's it going? I suspect if you're here, like me, you're here because you haven't been able to find any other really good videos with any tips or tricks or clear instructions that show you exactly what's going on and what to do for your dual overhead cam, late 70s, early 80s in Honda inline 4. I struggled so much with this thing. I tried, I failed, I disassembled, reassembled. I'm gonna hopefully help you avoid having to do the same thing. So I'm gonna show you a couple of tips and tricks. I also suspect if you're here, it's definitely because you're struggling like I did with getting this exhaust cam situated right with your punch marks, your notches, the crank, your exhaust timing chain and the exhaust sprocket, all of that kind of stuff. If you've attempted it on your own and you've been reading the manuals or you're just thinking about doing it or you've talked to other folks who've done it, you probably know what I'm talking about. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on here, and I'll do my very best to help you and show you a couple of the things that I learned. So the shape of the lobes on the cam are going to keep you from being able to put the cam in where everything is nice and perfectly level with the cylinder head. If you've read the manuals and you've kind of tried to figure out how to reassemble this, maybe you've had to take the cylinder head off for one reason or another. I've had to take it off for several reasons. I snapped an exhaust manifold stud and had to send this out to a buddy to have it machined out and then retap the hole for it. That was a nightmare. I've had to do a valve job and replace all the oil seals. I mean, these are 40-year-old motorcycles, right? And if you're like me, you're just a regular guy or gal in your garage at home, trying to learn, trying to do. I am not certified. I am not a professional mechanic. I don't have professional training or experience or education in this. I'm just a normal guy trying to figure this out as I go, learn a few things, and hopefully come out on the other end with a pretty cool project. And I'm sure if you're here, you're just like me. So I want to be as helpful to you as I possibly can. This might not be the perfect description for you. So leave me a comment below and I'll do the very best I can to answer your question or try to help you figure some things out. So if you're here like me, you've probably struggled a hell of a lot with this exhaust cam. The situation of this exhaust cam is so critical to the timing and the performance of this engine when you've gotten it all buttoned up that there's a lot of stress and a lot of frustration, a lot of anxiety involved, and that's totally understandable, especially with these punch marks, which serve as a guide for you about how you're supposed to align it, and these notches. When you're putting this all back together, it's virtually impossible to hold this cam down with one hand, tighten things down, sort all this stuff out, and have everything line up the way that it's supposed to. Because these lobes, as you can see, of course, are egg-shaped. That's so they can depress the shim, depress the valve, and either let air in or exhaust out as the engine's running. Okay, we all understand that. But that means when you try to put it in there as level as possible just by hand before you tighten anything down, part of the cam is being pushed up by the lobes, and you've got to figure out, with all of this grease and grime and assembly lube or engine oil or whatever's on this thing, with one hand, hold it down while also delicately depressing the shim and button everything else up. It's an unmitigated disaster. I tried to follow the manuals the way that they instruct you to do it, and it just was not working for me. So I had to figure a few other things out. So one of the biggest tips and tricks I can give you is, before the manuals ever mention anything about it, you know, go ahead once you've gotten your intake chain on and you've gotten it through the exhaust chain and you've got your sprocket on and everything, and you've set it down in this channel, get your A and your E exhaust caps, the bearing caps, and tighten them down until they depress the cam down. You don't have to put it under a lot of tension. It is more than hand tight, so you will need to use a ratchet or something, but don't go and exert a lot of force. You literally only need it until it depresses everything down and it seats pretty well. That, first of all, is going to give you a heck of a lot of wiggle room and a lot more opportunity to move this sprocket on and off within this space, so you can adjust the chain and adjust the sprocket appropriately, because there are these little 10mm bolts that go through this sprocket and into this tab that's actually part of the exhaust cam. it can be extremely difficult when this cam is up and not under tension to have enough slack in this chain and enough wiggle room to get all of that sorted out. It took me forever. I am probably so lucky that I didn't break something or ruin something. And this was one of the parts that really made me want to use this thing as a boat anchor. I'm sure some folks that have modern bikes, and I have modern bikes, will think it's a boat anchor anyway, even when it's running well, but whatever. Anyway, that's just going to help you a hell of a lot in terms of getting this part sorted out. Give yourself some wiggle room. It doesn't matter, at least it didn't for me, how loose my tensioners were. I just never seemed to have enough play in the chain to get it on the sprocket and get it sorted out, because you've got to put it back up on this little mounting piece here, get this bolt in, and it's just a disaster. So get it pushed down, get it sorted, and give yourself some wiggle room in that regard. The other thing that this is going to do is really help you out when we go to try to get you level. So when you do that, when you tighten all of this down, you're going to find that this punch mark is high and this punch mark is low. This notch is high and this notch is low. No matter how hard you try, when you tighten down your bearing caps, it's the natural, comfortable position for the cam is going to make it so it's a little out of whack. That's fine. What you want to do is whatever tool you're using to advance or delay the timing and set the tab right, because remember, if you've read your manual and you're following the instructions, one of the most critical things to do is start everything. When you're installing the exhaust cam and all of that, make sure that the number 1 and the number 4 cylinders are at top dead center. And the way the manuals tell you to do this is there's a little tab inside of there that there's a tiny little arrow that will point to T. So I think it'll say a tiny little S, a tiny little F, some hash marks. There will be a number 1 and a number 4, and then a big letter T. Well, you want this tiny little metal arrow from the top pointing right down at that T. That's where you want to start. But the problem is, really what you're trying to do is get to a point where eventually at T, for top dead center, everything is like you see it is here, nice and level. So your notches on the exhaust cam are nice and level with the cylinder head, and your punch marks on your exhaust sprocket are as level with the cylinder head as possible. It's not going to be that way when you first put this in as best you can and you tighten it down, because again, these egg-shaped lobes are going to push it into a more comfortable position that's not level. That's fine. What you want to do, the trick is, take whatever tool you're using and either advance or delay, or advance or delay, however you want to phrase that, until the cam, so the notches and your punch marks are as level with the cylinder head as possible. Now, the bad news is you're no longer going to be at T or top dead center where you need to be. Cool, totally fine, don't worry about it. Take your tool out, leave it alone, because for right now, everything's nice and level the way you need it to be. The bad part about this is it's a little tedious, but it works. Take your nut out, take your sprocket off, take the timing chain off, and loosen your A and E end bearing caps. Loosen them good. You want to give that cam enough play so that it lifts itself back up and finds that comfortable position again. It's going to return itself because, again, the shape of the lobes, it's going to twist itself one way or the other back to that comfortable position. As long as your lobes are always pointed toward this number 1 spark plug, you're going to be fine. Once it does that, so you've loosened all of this up and the cam pops back up, it's going to find that natural position again. Your lobes are pointed toward the number 1 spark plug. Go ahead and reassemble your exhaust sprocket, your chain, and tighten your end caps back up. Tighten them so that, like in the beginning, you push that cam down. You can get all of this sorted and situated and put back together. And then come over here to your crank and either delay or advance it back to T. 90% of the time, if you're not damn near perfectly level at that point, you're going to be really, really close. And you just keep doing that until you get to perfectly center at T for top dead center on 1 and 4. So again, let's just do a brief review. The biggest things are loosening and tightening your A and your E bearing caps on the ends. I like to put D on here too so that it keeps the cam in a good position, but you don't have to. Tightening these down before the manuals call for it, but just only enough so that it pushes it down. Don't use your torque wrench. Don't torque it down really hard. It gives you a lot of play here to deal with this sprocket and this chain, even if your tensioners are as loose as possible. You don't want this to be the most frustrating thing ever. This is supposed to be enjoyable. I had to tell myself that many times. When you're initially putting this in, stick it in here until with the lobes facing the number 1 spark plug inward, okay, because this is the number 1 cylinder, and let it find that comfortable position. And you'll know what it is because you won't be able to twist it or turn it without a lot of force or the cam itself rising or lowering, okay? When you find that comfortable position and your lobes are pointed toward the number 1 spark plug here, and you can go ahead and tighten your end caps, so A and E, just with a socket or something until it's firm and it's pushing the cam down. Reassemble this assembly here, make sure your holes are lined up and you can get the chain on. And the best way to do that is you can move this whole assembly here, this whole sprocket off into this space here, and it'll give you a lot of wiggle room and a lot of opportunity to mess with the chain and get everything lined up. Put it back together, make sure this is at least hand tight so that when you turn the crank, the timing chain moves the chain, the sprocket, and of course the cam. You will not be in line. One of these, usually this far notch here, the one that I'm pointing to, will be lower, and this one will be higher. This punch mark, the infamous punch marks, this will be higher, this will be lower. That's okay. You're going to play with this, moving it forward or backwards until everything is nice and level, and you don't have to go very far. It's really small movements. Once you either move it forward or go back and this stuff is level, your punch marks and your notches, leave it alone. Make a note for yourself how far you had to go forward or how far you had to go back, but nonetheless, just observe and leave it alone. Undo all of this so it's nice and loose again. Just remember that, if these are tightened down, it's a hell of a lot easier to deal with the sprocket and the chain. So you probably want to be taking this off first before you loosen these. Loosen it back up, and you will feel the cam will naturally spring back to its comfortable position because these lobes for the number 2 right here, okay, that you can see, they will want to push the cam this way, which will throw your marks off. It's a real pain in the butt, but it's fine. You're actually doing the right thing. Get it all buttoned up again and tightened down, and then move the crank back to top dead center, and it will give you almost perfect results every time.